Morning everybody, how are you all doing this morning?
Very well.
Good to see you, hope you are well. And to you guys online at home, good morning to you as well. Hopefully everyone's signed in or took their name off the register. If you haven't, please do that, just so that we have a record of you attending. Let us pray this morning. Almighty God, we thank you for your goodness, we thank you for your grace, we thank you for your mercy. We thank you, Lord, that we can be here today and just spend some time with each other in your presence and spend some time just considering your word and who you are. We just pray you will speak to us, you will challenge us, and you will change us in the name of Jesus. Everyone say Amen. 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 Okay, first of all, just to let everyone know, so all of our talks now have been uploaded to YouTube, so we now have a YouTube channel. So if you want to look for our talks and stuff like that, it's all sort of galleries on our YouTube channel. You can find details on that on the website. Secondly, thank you for everybody that's continued to support the Regeneration Project throughout the last 4 months and support it in a variety of different ways. So by logging on, by connecting through the midweek talk and the Sunday talk, by continuing to give, and so on and so forth. And so we're encouraging everybody to continue to connect with us, to continue to support us, to continue to give, okay? And so our midweek thing, we're going to move it to a bi-weekly thing. From this week, we're going to move it to a bi-weekly meeting, or a virtual meeting. And what we're going to try and do is mix it up a little bit. So instead of just doing prayer, we're going to start by doing some discussions as well, and some online discussions, and just to help. Hopefully, it will be something that will benefit those that join and connect. So we'll be doing that this Wednesday. All right, we are in the book of Nehemiah today. Everyone say Nehemiah? Nehemiah. Okay, and the Bible says, and you can't read that, but I can, so I will read it. The Bible says, the words of Nehemiah, the son of Hakaliah, whatever it is. Now it happened in the month of Chelsea, in the 12th year, while I was in Susa, the capital, that Hananiah, one of my brothers, and some men from Judah came, and I asked them concerning the Jews who had escaped and had survived captivity and about Jerusalem. And they said to me, the remnant there in the province who survived captivity are in great distress and reproach, and the walls of Jerusalem is broken down and its gates are burnt with fire. And when I heard these words, I sat down and wept and mourned for days. And I was fasting and praying before God of heaven. And I said, I beseech you, O Lord of heaven, the great and awesome God, who preserves the covenant and loving kindness for those who love him and keep his commandments. Let your ear now be attentive and your eyes open and hear the prayer of your servant, which is praying before you now, day and night. And on behalf of the sons of Israel, your servants, confessing sins of the sons of Israel, which have sinned against you, I and my father's house have sinned. We have acted corruptly against you. We have not kept the commandments, nor the statutes, nor the ordinances which you commanded your servant Moses. Remember your word, which you commanded your servant Moses, saying, if you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the people, but if you return to me and keep my commandments, then I do. And through those of you who have been scattered were in the most remote part of heavens, I will gather them from there, and I will bring them to the place where I have chosen to cause my name to dwell. They are your servants, your people, whom you redeemed by your power and by your strong hand. O Lord, I beseech you that your ear may be attentive and to the prayer of your servant and the prayer of your servants who delight to revere your name. And make your servant successful today and grant him compassion before this man. And in the last verse, very interesting, it says, now I was a cupbearer to the king, and then it ends there. And this morning, I just want to talk to you on the topic, now's the time to rebuild. That's our topic today. We're starting a new preaching series, a teaching series, and it's around the concept of rebuilding. And over the next few weeks, we're going to be looking at Nehemiah and we're going to be going through the various points of Nehemiah. We are referencing it against the book by John P. Cotter, which name escapes me, but it's about transformation. That's a business book about transformation, and we're referencing leading change. We're referencing that through our talk over the next couple of weeks. And the reason we're doing it is because I believe, and we believe, it's now the time to rebuild. As we slowly ease our way out of lockdown, as our society slowly edges its way back to some sense of normality, I think it's a great time for us to think about what we do, why we do, and begin to reimagine how we do and what that looks like in today's world. Everyone say reimagine.
Reimagine.
Reimagine. You know, what we have experienced this year in terms of the pandemic, for some people has been a bit of a pause button, hasn't it? It's been a bit of one of those moments where we've all had to stop at some point. And our lives have changed, and what we do has changed. And it's actually put a pause on the way we've lived our lives and the way we've conducted our lives. It's put a pause on some of our normal routines. And we've had to pause business as usual. And this pause has given many of us the ability to reflect and in some regards reset. You know, for some people the last 4 months will be a bit of a reset period where they've been able to step out, look back and actually change the way they're doing things and how they're doing things. And you know, as we go back to normal, we're not really going back to normal. Our world is changed. And we need to change with that. And so the idea here is that it's time to rebuild in light of the world that we are now living in and do things in a way that reflects the world that we're living in. You know, I think it's now time to start rebuilding. It's time to start rebuilding and reimagining our future. You know, the pandemic's not gone, but we can't always live in that pandemic mode. We have to move beyond that at some point. And so it's time for us to start reimagining and rebuilding what our future life will look like. You know, it's for those people that have lived their lives and they can on pause, they're in this, this sense of chaos that they've had for the last few months. It's time to start reimagining that life, and it's time to start pulling that life back together and deciding who we're going to be and how we're going to be going forward. For those of us whose work and career has been jackknifed, you know what jackknife is? It's when a lorry sort of just flips over on the motorway. And for some people that's the reality. Their work, their career has been jackknifed. You know, now's the time for us to start thinking about rebuilding. Rebuilding about what work, what career, what we do looks like in the future. You know, for those of us whose dreams, ambitions and passions have been abruptly halted in mid-flow, it's now time for us to start rebuilding and reimagining those dreams, those ambitions and those passions. For us as a church, for us as a spiritual community, whilst our calling as church never changed. We were church all the way through. You know, it is time for us to think about what we're doing. It is time for us to rebuild the community in light of the world that we're living in. And the work that we're doing as a radically inclusive community. And the scripture gives us actually two wonderful stories about rebuilding. Two wonderful stories, or it's actually one wonderful story split into two books. I'm told that it actually used to be one book, and they were known as First Ezra and Second Ezra. They were one story. We know them today as Ezra and Nehemiah. And Ezra is set in a period of around 500 BC. And what Ezra does, Ezra sets out to rebuild and rededicate the temple. The temple has been destroyed by the Babylonians. The Jews have been exiled. And Jerusalem is just a wasteland. And Ezra receives the call to go back and to rebuild that temple and to rededicate that temple. And we're told that Ezra took a group of around 50,000 exiles back to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple. And then some years later, and I think it's probably around about 90 years after Ezra started to rebuild the temple, but sort of 12 years or so after Ezra's work finished, Nehemiah gets the call. And Nehemiah continues that story. Nehemiah continues that story of the Jews coming out of exile and rebuilding Jerusalem and rebuilding the homeland. And you know, if we look at Nehemiah, there's a couple of things that Nehemiah reminds me just about life, just about calling, just about faith. The first thing that it reminds me is that the faith of God's people was not in some foreign king. And I think that's quite important, but they were in the hands of God. Their faith, their future, their destiny, the things that they were going to do was all in the hands of God. And you know, I'm reminded of that, and I'm comforted by that today, because I'm reminded that my faith is not in what goes on around me. It's not in what's happening out there and over there, and what the pandemic's doing. My faith is in the hands of God. My destiny is in the hands of God. My future is in the hands of God. And whilst all what's going on there sometimes does blow us around a bit, there is something in me that anchors my calling, that anchors my purpose, that anchors who I am, the core of who I am, grounds it back in God. There's a song, and the words are, grounded firm and deep in my Saviour's love. And I think Nehemiah reminds us of that these things happen, and sometimes we're part of those things happening, but actually our fate rather, and our destiny is in God's hands. Yeah. The second thing that Nehemiah reminds me is that our lives and what each and every one of us do are part of a sacred thread of faith, hope and love. Yes. And what we see in Nehemiah is all of these individual journeys coming together for one purpose. All of these things coming together as community. And I think that's true of us. We all have different lives and we all have different things going on. But here in the region, we come together. And all of our individual journeys come together in order that we can build God's kingdom. And we can build a community that we believe resembles God's kingdom. And it reminds me that we are all sacred. Everyone say all. We are all sacred, and what each and every one of us does is sacred, and only together can we create that community that's sacred. You know, Nehemiah lets us know that the nation of Israel continues Nehemiah lets us know that the book of Nehemiah, that it's Nehemiah's job to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. And Nehemiah's job, or Nehemiah's calling in this regard, is bricks and mortar. His job was to rebuild the walls. And then you've got Ezra, who came before him, and Ezra's job was to organise the rebuilding of the temple. And sometimes you can go, which is more important, the temple or the walls? The walls of the temple. Who's more important here? And what the story of Ezra and Nehemiah remind us is together they are important. Right. One is not more important than the other. This is not more sacred than that. Yes. But together. Yeah. And Eugene Peterson, he says this, he said, the stories of these two men are interwoven in a seamless fabric of vocational holiness. Neither job was more or less important or holy than the other. And I think that's important. We understand that as a community. We all do different things. But none of what we do is more holy or more important. But together, collectively, is what's holy and what's important. And I think, you know, when we think about rebuilding community, when we think about building church, it's easy to say, well, that's the job of the leadership. That's the job of the pastors. That's the job of this person or that person or this leader or that person. But actually the job of rebuilding community is all of our jobs. It's the job of the community together. And Nehemiah lets us know. Because when Nehemiah went back, he took workmen back with him. He took admin people back with him. He took finance people back with him. He took cooks back with him that could cook food for the workmen. And everybody worked together to rebuild and to do the job that he believed he was called to do. And what that lets us know is that as a community we need each other. We ability. This community needs your sacred work and my sacred work together. We need artists and artisans. We need entrepreneurs and business leaders. We need clerical and we need civic. We need therapeutic healers and coaches and mentors. We need the administrators and the accountants. We need the advertising people. We need all of that together to do what God has called us to do. We need people that work with their hands, and we need people that think and plan and plot with their brains. We need both. We need the ones who feel and sense their way through, intuitively hearing what God's Spirit calls them to do. But equally, we need the people that are willing to do the hard grafting as well. It's not either or, but it's both and. We need it. We need you. We need each other. And what Nehemiah does, Nehemiah helps us connect what we do out there with what we do in here. You know, it's not sacred in here and secular out there. You know, what you do tomorrow is not secular. And what you're doing today is sacred. No. It's all sacred. It's all holy. It's all God's work. It's all God's work. And I believe that it's not either or, but it's both and. You know, do I do this? No, it's both and. And I believe that what I do out there from Monday to Friday is inextricably bound with what we do in here on Sunday and what we do. And when I mean here, I'm not talking about the place, but I'm talking about the Regen here and what we do. And it's inextricably bound with our life together as community. There are a few thoughts I want to pick out from the text that we've read today. That's sort of a prelude, I guess, to the series. But there's a few thoughts I just want to pick out from the text that I read today. And two thoughts, really. Two thoughts. The first thought is this. The time is now. Everyone say now. Now. The time to rebuild is now. To rebuild our lives, to rebuild our futures, to rebuild what we are, to rebuild our community and how our community is. The time is now. Now is an interesting word, isn't it? Because now puts it right in this moment. You know, the time to do it is tomorrow. No. The time to do it is now. It's a word that gives us this sense of urgency. It's a word that places our attention and our focus in the moment that we have right now. The time is to do it now. For Nehemiah, the time was now. It was his now. It wasn't tomorrow, it wasn't next one, it wasn't next year or year after that. It was now. And when we look at verse 1 of the text, he says, it's interesting, verse 1 he says, now it happened. For Nehemiah, there was a very specific moment when that now happened. There was a very specific moment when he had felt the passion and the purpose to do something different with his life. There was a very specific moment when he heard the call of God and the voice of God saying, the walls are broken down, the gates are open, people are distressed, people are exposed. Something needs to happen now. It was a very specific moment that struck me. I don't know about you, but I'm sure I know that when I look back at moments in my life, and at the time I don't necessarily identify it as the moment, but when I look back, I know the moment. I know the moment when I decided to stop doing that and start doing that. I know the moment when, you know, all of the important things in my life, when I decided this is what I want, this is who I want to be with, this is the kind of things I want to do, this is where I want to be, this is how I want to be. I remember that was the moment. And Nehemiah had that moment, the now moment, the moment when it became urgent. You know what urgent means, don't you? Urgent means when you can't hear anything else because something else is screaming out at you. And everything else going on around you is just noise. All you can hear is that thing that you feel that you now must do, that urgency. I have to do it now. And then what Nehemiah tells us, that it happened for him because one of his brothers brothers came back from Jerusalem. He said, how are people doing down there? How's it going? What's it looking like? And his brother came and told me, he said, there's a remnant there that remain there who survived captivity, but they're in great distress and reproach. The walls of Jerusalem are broken down. The gates are burnt with fire. And what this reminds me, or what this tells me from the text, is the urgency that Nehemiah felt was around a very specific purpose. And Nehemiah was the person that organised the rebuilding of the walls. But the urgency that Nehemiah felt had very little to do with walls. It was to do with people. It was to do with community. It was to do with the lives of others. The reason the real walls needed rebuilding was not because of the walls. It was because of the people. And what we get from there is that Nehemiah's purpose is not about seeing a great built wall. I like building things. I'm a big Lego fan. Marty's just getting into Minecraft. And those of you that have no idea what Minecraft is, it's a block game. I tell you, I've built some wonderful Minecraft edifices over the last few months. They are a sight to behold and wonder, you know. That's just me, you know. Big old man. Playing Lego and computer games. Well, that's all right. Yeah. But you know, I just like building things. Yeah. But actually, for Nehemiah wasn't about building things. It was about people. It was about community. It was about the lives of other people. And what his sense of urgency related to the welfare and the well-being of his people. And I think that's another thing about when we hear that now moment. That actually, it looks like this, but it's not about this. It's about that. And there's that, you hear that calling. And it's that sense that what I'm about to do, or what we're about to do, cannot be delayed any longer. Because the people who survived and escaped, they need it now. Not tomorrow, not next week, but now. And in the writing of Nehemiah says, when I heard these words, I sat down and I wept and I mourned for days, and I fasted and prayed before the God of heavens. And you see, when you hear that now moment, it drives you, it pushes you to action. And Nehemiah's immediate action was to pray, because that's his framework, that's his concept. That's who Nehemiah is. That's how Nehemiah relates. But it drove Nehemiah to that place of action where he starts with prayer. And there's something about urgency. There's something about that now moment. How many of you can identify yourself as procrastinators? Sometimes. Yeah. Sometimes I'm on the ball. Sometimes I am so focused. I don't notice anything around me, but there are other times. This other film comes out. John P. Cotter says this. He says, a higher rate of urgency does not imply ever-present panic, anxiety, or fear. It means a state in which complacency is virtually absent. Yeah. And so what urgency does is it pushes complacency aside, and it puts you in that mode where you're ready for action. You're ready to do something. You know, and there needs to be that sense of urgency. There needs to be that thing screaming on the inside of us, the saying that things can't go on as you are. Self-help writer Edmund Mbiak says, where there is no sense of urgency, there is usually a strong habit of procrastination. And that's what urgency does. Urgency pushes procrastination out of the way. No, you know, I procrastinate because that sense of urgency hasn't been reached yet. You know, I can have a month to do a report, 2 months, 3 months to do a report. You know, I'll go down there on that Monday morning, log on. And you know, I wonder what Facebook say. I wonder what my bank account say. Oh, I wonder I was looking at the other day is saying. I wonder what this person's saying and that person. I can be there and I can have loads of stuff to do. But if I don't have that sense of urgency, I'm like, I wonder what the fridge is saying.
Yes.
And it's really hard working that close to the fridge. I start wondering, whoa, I've got that in the loft. And something is in there. And I'm surprised at myself the times I've just wandered up to go on another endeavour, looking for something. But the moment with me is once that sense of urgency kicks in, once I get that sense that you need to do this, Phil, or you're going to let your conscience down. You need to do this. The deadline is tomorrow. Amazing things happen. It's true, when that urgency happens, then all of a sudden my energy levels spike. Yes. All of a sudden tiredness goes out the window and I can work through the night, like on something, getting something. All of a sudden, stuff that I've given about for the last few weeks and haven't really got a clear strategy, all of a sudden the strategy comes. Boom. I find out with preaching sometimes. Sometimes I'm there. Sometimes I know what I'm talking about a week, 2 weeks beforehand. And sometimes it's the night beforehand. And all week I'll be like, maybe this, maybe that. And all of a sudden, because I know I've got to deliver this tomorrow morning, my brain, my spirit, boom. And there it is. And everything comes into action. And that's the thing about urgency. Urgency pushes us to that place where we move. The time to rebuild is now. I believe there is a need for a community like the Regeneration Project because people are in distress. I believe people are in distress. There is a need for a life-changing, welcoming, accepting, inclusive, and affirming community, spiritual community like the one that we have here, now more than ever. I want you to think about the emotional, mental well-being of people that have suffered over the last few months. I want you to think about the hopelessness and despair that some people have had to live with over the last few months. I want you to think about the rise of mental illness. One of the things I've heard over the last few months is the mental illness time bomb that's ticking away. I want you to think about the rise of mental illness. I want you to think about the rise of domestic violence, the rise of child abuse, the rise of children that can't call their home a safe place. But they haven't been able to escape that safe place because of lockdown. I want you to think about all of those things. I want you to think about those people that getting out their house was a place to go for safety, but they haven't been able to go to that place, any place of safety. Now is the time to start rebuilding our community. Everyone say now. I want you to think about the polarisation of our society. I can honestly say that I don't think I've been in a time where our society seems more polarised. And it's almost like a contradiction because on one hand you see this great unity, but on the other hand you see this polarisation. And I can't think about a time that our society was this polarised in my life. Think about the issues that we face around us. Think about what we've seen over the BLM movement and racial disharmony and integration problems that we're facing with that over the last few months. Think about hate crimes about marginalised people, how they have risen over the last few months. Think about this recent spate of violence towards trans people and those who suffer from gender dysphoria. Think about that rise of crime. That, it was an accident. They accidentally hung themselves. Think about what we're reading and seeing around us. Think about the increasing gap between rich and poor in our society. And over the last 10 years that's got bigger. And I guarantee you over the last 4 months that's got bigger. Think about how impoverished families have suffered because of the lockdown restrictions, because of things like free school meals and so on and so forth. Think about those who have lost their jobs, who are losing their houses, losing their attics. Today is the day to start rebuilding now. Think about your future, today to start rebuilding your future. Think about the things that you're doing, today is the day to start doing. Think about the things we do as a community and we should be doing, and the calling we feel to do. Today is the day. That's the first thing we want to tell you. Now. The second thing I want to tell you is now is not just the time, but now is my time. And there's a difference between realizing that now is the time and now is my time. And it's interesting when you read the prayer that Nehemiah prays. Apparently there are 7 prayers where Nehemiah says to God, remember in Nehemiah. Okay, 7 prayers, and this is the first of them. And he asks God to remember. He says, remember what you promised us. Remember you said that if we become unfaithful, you will scatter us. But if we turn back to you, you will bring us back together. He says, remember that. And the thing is, it's interesting, isn't it? Because he's asking God to remember, but God never forgot. Yeah. God doesn't forget. God don't need remembering. And actually what Nehemiah is doing is he's remembering himself. He's reminding himself of the call that God has given him. He's reminding himself of the need to step up and step out and do what God is now calling him. You know, Nehemiah is a cupbearer for the king. Nehemiah is not a construction person. He's not a wall builder. He's not an engineer. He's not a structural engineer. He's not a project manager. He's not a construction manager. In fact, if this was a job Nehemiah was going for, I guarantee his CV would be seriously wanted and lacking. He hasn't got the skills or the experience. And what he's doing in this prayer is reminding himself of what God said and what God would do. He's building that confidence in himself to say, now is not just the time, but now is my time. It's my time to do something different. It's my time to do the thing that I can no longer put off. It's my time to give up the cozy, comfortable place. Let's face it now. While some of Nehemiah's people were in great distress and reproach, Nehemiah wasn't. No. Nehemiah was in a cozy place. He was a king's servant. And guess what? The king's servant, they got treated pretty good. He lived in a pretty good place. He had all of the things that he needed. And now he was feeling that call to step out of the cozy and the comfortable and to do what was risky. And in some regard, unthankful. And we'll see that as we go through this story. You know, Nehemiah's job was an unthankful job. Because there are a whole load of people that didn't support Nehemiah. There are a whole load of people that worked against Nehemiah and tried to hinder what Nehemiah was doing, even though it was for the good of the community. And so I believe today that as we reflect on this, now is the time to rebuild. That now is the time, my time. We had your church the same thing. Me. And I don't know what, you know, we've all got our calling of what we're doing in terms of our own lives, but we've got our calling of what we're doing in terms of this community. Now is my time to rebuild. And many of us may be in good, comfortable, cozy places today. Everyone say comfortable. Comfortable. Cozy. Warm. Plentiful all around you, you know. And I said it a few weeks ago. Sometimes a good place is not the great place or the best place. And so whilst Nehemiah was in a good place, God was calling him to a great place. But guess what? The great place wasn't as cozy, it wasn't as comfortable, and it sure wasn't as plentiful as the good place that he was in. And so as I finish up today, I just want to, as we reflect on this text, I think there's a sense of urgency calling us. I think there's a sense of urgency calling us as a community. I think there's a sense of urgency that is calling some of us individually. There's an echo that's saying, now is the time, but also now is my time. And so I just want to leave that with you today. God bless you and great afternoon.